right, let me be the first to congratulate Sarah Riley on a well-deserved award. And this award is well-deserved, and it's well-deserved because in telling the story of rubber stamp visa applications at the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, Sarah practiced good journalism. As any journalist can tell you, all you can do is tell the story right. Everything after that is generally out of our hands. Far too often, trivial stories get far too much attention, and important stories get ignored. And more times than not, that's something that's not in the hands of the journalist. All we can do is tell the story right, contact all the sources, and make sure all sides are represented. And that's exactly what happened here. So what do I mean by this? These days, like most professions, journalists are known by an assortment of names. Journalists, new media, analysts, pundits, you name it. Personally, I like the old school term of reporter. Because if you're really, truly trying to be a reporter, you're doing it right. What a reporter does is they put themselves in the middle of a story and then they report what they see. If as a journalist you're focused on doing that, you're doing it right. And again, that's what happened here. But she also took the story one step further, and she became an investigative reporter. And what do I mean by that? An investigative reporter, at least the way I understand it, they insert themselves into a situation someone, somewhere, once kept hidden from the public and reports on that. And that's exactly what happened here. Because I can assure you, the powers that be at the U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, they never wanted this story told. And the best way to accomplish being an investigative reporter, at least in my opinion, is through the use of whistleblowers. And that's exactly what happened here as well. By seeking out the whistleblowers, Sarah was able to insert herself in the middle of the story that many powerful forces were trying to keep hidden. And whistleblowers are, in my opinion, a great tool for investigative reporters. And unfortunately, it's a tool most journalists don't use nearly enough. And I also think Sarah will agree with me on this. Whatever accolades she deserves for this story, they pale in comparison to the courage shown by the whistleblower, in this case, Christina Poulos. By telling her story, Sarah also made sure that her courage wasn't in vain. And I think while it's important that Sarah exposed what happened with the pressure from the higher-ups to rubber stamp visa application, it's also important in Sarah's story she showed what happened to the whistleblower and the kind of treatment that Ms. Poulos received. And that included threat of job loss, demotion, and relocation. And unfortunately, what happened to Ms. Poulos is far too common to whistleblowers everywhere, both in the public and in the private sphere. Recently, I wrote a book review about a book on Acorn. The difference between this book on Acorn and most books, it was written by an Acorn whistleblower. The name of the book is Acorn 8, Race, Power, and Politics. And it was written by a guy named Michael McRae. And here's what I said about him as a whistleblower. Like most whistleblowers, rather than meeting him with concern and understanding, the system attempted to cover up his revelations, and they smeared him in the process. And if anybody read the story, that's exactly what happened to Christina Poulos. And like I said, unfortunately, this is what happens to most whistleblowers. And like Mark said, I'm from Chicago. In Chicago, I'm friendly with a guy named Pat McDonough. And I'm sure no one in this room has heard of Pat McDonough. He's the original whistleblower on something called the hired truck scandal. And it's one of the biggest scandals in Chicago history. And anybody that knows my city knows what kind of statement that is. So about 7 years ago, Pat McDonough, who was working as a plumbing inspector, he was on a job when he noticed the number of trucks. They were just sitting there. That site led to the hired truck scandal. And for the last 7 years, and a decade before it, Pat McDonough relied for almost all of his income on the city of Chicago. So think about what he was doing. He was blowing the whistle on corruption of the city of Chicago, all while relying on them to feed himself and his family. And how do you think the powers that be treated Pat McDonough? Did they throw him a parade? Did they give him a medal? No. For the last 7 years, what they've tried to do is get him fired. And they've done everything they could, and they almost succeeded a couple of times. In fact, he still has a federal case in federal court right now pending based on some of the behavior they've done. And this is the kind of thing that whistleblowers can expect. And by the way, as crazy as this sounds, we as a society in the world have come a long way in our treatment of whistleblowers. They used to be treated even worse. The most famous case of a whistleblower is the case of Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, a European doctor in the 1800s. Dr. Semmelweis, while he was working for a hospital in Vienna, he hypothesized that patients were dying because doctors weren't washing their hands enough. Think about what he was saying to doctors: wash your hands more. Doctors who are notorious for huge egos were none too happy that someone was telling them how to perform surgeries. So instead of embracing what he was saying, His colleagues worked to discredit him until he was discredited and thrown out of the hospital and deemed unprofessional. He moved throughout the rest of Europe for the next decade. He continued to hypothesize patients were dying because people weren't washing their hands enough. So what happened? The same people that discredited him in Vienna, they reached out to the entire European medical community until he was blackballed entirely. As a result, he developed a drinking problem and he started acting erratically. So what did people do? The same powers that be, along with his wife and the rest of his family, had him committed to an insane asylum, and he died there weeks after he was committed. 7 years after his death, none other than Louis Pasteur himself confirmed everything Dr. Semmelweis had said, and he'd been vindicated. Of course, Dr. Semmelweis was still dead. And by the way, if there was just one journalist who showed 1/10 the courage that he had, he would have been maybe vindicated in life and not in death. Now, since he's become a hero and a martyr. You talk to any whistleblower, this guy is as big a hero as they get. But he lived a miserable life. And for what? He wanted doctors to wash their hands more. That's all he told people. And so I want to tell one last story about whistleblowers just to show you how important they are. Because if journalists don't have whistleblowers, what we have to do is we have to become whistleblowers ourselves. In the late 1800s, there was a journalist named Elizabeth Jane Cochran. And by the way, she didn't write under Elizabeth Jane Cochran, because back in the 1800s, if you were a woman and a journalist, couldn't even write under your own name. She wrote under the pen name Nellie Bly. In 1886, the New York World, then owned by legendary publisher Joseph Pulitzer, gave her an assignment. Tell me if you've ever had an assignment this tough. Fake being crazy, get yourself locked up in the Blackwell Island Insane Asylum, and stay there for 10 days. And what she found made the movie One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest look like Club Med, and it turned into the seminal book 10 Days in the Madhouse. So think about it. If Sarah didn't have a whistleblower, what would she have to do to tell the story? Get a job pretending to be IT, janitorial, to see things from inside. That's the kind of courage the whistleblowers show. And frankly, they make us look good because they're the ones that are courageous. Give us the story, and all we do is write it. And I also wanted to, because we're obviously here for the Center of Immigration Studies, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the impressions I've had dealing with Department of Homeland Security and ICE as a member of the new media. Now, first of all, generally it's been good. When I ask for statements, they usually give them to me. When I ask them for before a certain date, they usually give them to me. They're generally mostly professional, and frankly, I've worked with people in government from local to national, and most of them are professional. That said, and this is very important, the statements I get from DHS are almost always reviewed by a team of lawyers, and these are statements that are little more than legal mumbo-jumbo. And believe me, most people don't want to read legal mumbo-jumbo. And that leads me to my conclusion. Rarely, if ever, will DHS tip you off to a great story. And think about the difference between the way DHS works with you and the way a whistleblower works with you. Do you think the whistleblower brings a team of lawyers with them when they're going to speak to you? Do you think before they give you a statement, they have a team of lawyers look at it and then only give you the statement that makes them look good? So another thing to think about, in a totalitarian regime, in Iran, in North Korea, what's the media? The media is little more than people reading off government statements. So if you're a journalist, if you're anybody that only solely relies on the government for your information, how much different are you than the media in a totalitarian regime? Now, if I were to give someone advice about dealing with DHS, what I would tell you is try to speak to them last. And the reason I would do that is if you can get as full a story as possible, you can ask the right question. If you ask the right question, you minimize, notice I said minimize, not completely eliminate the chance that they're going to spin you with a nonsensical statement. And the best example I have is a story I did on a guy named Amado Espinoza Ramirez. He's a suspected child molester, including child rape and incest. He's also a suspected illegal alien. He was in ICE custody. They put a tracking monitor on him. He cut it off, and now he's in the wind. Now, I figured all of it out before I came to DHS. I knew that they had him. They were the last ones. I knew that he was in the wind. So I was able to ask the question the right way. And then when they gave me the answer, they admitted it, because they had no choice at that point. And so the reason I believe I was able to do that is because I knew enough to ask the question in the right way. And so before I turn it over to Mark, I also wanted to say a few words about the Center for Immigration Studies. First, I want to describe it two ways, lowbrow and highbrow. The lowbrow way is this. Sometimes in this world, you really need to talk to some smart people. And on the issue of immigration, The Center for Immigration Studies has a full stable of really smart people. I was just talking with Mark. One of them, obviously, is Jessica Vaughn, who's, I don't know what her IQ is, but it's off the charts. And on a more serious note, CIS, like most think tanks, are sophisticated, effective for the First Amendment. And I always tell people, the First Amendment isn't first by accident. It wasn't like they had a lottery like in the NBA draft. The First Amendment is first because it's the most important one. Free press, free speech. As long as they're truly free, any other injustice can be tackled. And so the Founding Fathers, I believe, wanted truly free speech because that leads to innovative speech, and innovative speech leads to democracy that's not only solid, that's solid, but not fragile. And that's what CIS is. It's an organization that on the issue of immigration, each and every day delivers free speech in a sophisticated manner, and then, of course, helps continue this great experiment known as the United States of America.